The command center was eerily quiet, the hum of the ship's engines echoing faintly in the background as everyone stared at the captain. The room, usually filled with the sounds of chatter and orders, seemed to hold its breath. His eyes, cold and unyielding, locked onto the officer who had just made the sexist remark. It wasn't just a casual comment, no, this was different. It was personal. Women belong in the kitchen, not in the field of command, the officer had said, his voice dripping with disdain as he laughed, oblivious to the storm he was about to unleash. For a moment, time seemed to stop. The crew looked at each other, unsure of what would happen next. Most of them had heard the jokes before. Some had even participated, knowing the higher-ups allowed it. But this time, something felt different. The captain, who had always been a beacon of calm under pressure, didn't flinch. His grip on the table was steady as he slowly raised his eyes to meet the officer's gaze. "I'll take care of this," the captain said quietly, but the weight of his words carried an edge that no one missed. The officer, unaware of what was coming, smirked and crossed his arms, clearly thinking that he'd won the moment. But then, without warning, the captain stood up. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice now laced with cold precision, "I must have misunderstood. You were just suggesting that the women here are only good for cooking and cleaning." "My mistake." The officer laughed, clearly dismissing the captain's words as a sarcastic retort. "Exactly. Some people just don't know their place." A heavy silence followed, broken only by the sharp click of the captain's boots as he stepped forward, the rest of the room hanging in tense uncertainty. And then, without hesitation, the captain did something no one had expected. He took off his uniform jacket, slowly and deliberately. The room watched in stunned silence as he handed it to the officer. "Here," the captain said, his voice calm yet piercing. "I believe this is more your style." The officer's face twisted into confusion, then anger. He was about to retort, but the captain cut him off with a sharp wave of his hand. "Put it on," the captain said, still calm. "You'll need it for the mission ahead. You're clearly the one suited to lead it now." The officer's eyes flickered between the captain and the crew, the realization dawning on him that he was the one being played. The crew, once silent, now shifted, exchanging glances. They could feel the tension. They could feel the power shift in the room. But the captain wasn't done. He turned to the rest of the crew, his gaze sweeping across their faces. "Anyone else?" he asked. "Anyone else here think women belong in the kitchen?" His words cut through the silence, a challenge to everyone in the room. No one moved. No one spoke. The captain's stare was unyielding, as if daring anyone to speak up. The officer, now visibly red-faced, stood frozen, unsure of how to respond. "You'll have your chance to speak," the captain said with a voice that brooked no argument. "But first, you'll be taking orders from the one person here who knows how to truly lead." And just like that, the captain had done something no one expected. He didn't shout. He didn't retaliate with the usual bravado. Instead, he took the sexist comment, turned it on its head, and used it to show the crew exactly who was in charge, without ever needing to raise his voice. As the officer stood there, unable to respond, the captain gave a single nod to the crew. The message was clear. The game had changed. The captain wasn't just a leader by title, he was a leader by action. And his leadership was something none of them would soon forget. The room remained silent for a long while after that, but the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with a new kind of respect. In that moment, something had shifted. Something fundamental had changed. The captain had shown them all what it truly meant to lead. It wasn't about power, it wasn't about status, it was about standing up for what was right, regardless of the odds. And with that, the captain turned back to his station, as if nothing had happened. But everyone in the room knew that everything had changed. The crew, still in shock, could only watch as he moved forward, resuming his duties with the same calm, calculated precision as always. The captain had made his point. The sexist comments, the jokes, they had no place here anymore. But as they went back to their work, the crew couldn't help but wonder, was this the captain's plan all along? Or had it been an instinctive reaction, something deeper than any of them could understand? The truth, as they would soon learn, was far more complicated, and far more powerful, than they could ever imagine. The ship's corridors seemed to echo with an almost palpable tension. The crew moved through them in silence, their thoughts still lingering on the captain's unexpected confrontation. The weight of what had just transpired was heavy in the air, like an invisible force that pressed down on everyone. They were no longer just crew members, they were witnesses to something that would change everything. As the captain returned to his command seat, the rest of the crew found themselves struggling to process what had just happened. Some of them had always respected him, but what he had done today was something entirely different. It wasn't just about leadership, it was about standing for something bigger than themselves. The officer who had made the sexist comment, now with the jacket slung across his shoulders, couldn't shake the feeling of being exposed. He had been a part of the crew for years, but now he felt like an outsider. His thoughts churned, his pride wounded, but there was something else too, a grudging respect for the captain, though he would never admit it aloud. As the minutes passed, the crew slowly began to return to their stations, but no one spoke much. Everyone knew things had shifted. They could feel it in their bones. The ship wasn't the same place it had been just a few hours ago. The captain's reputation wasn't built on his words alone, it was shaped by his actions, and today, he had proven that. The crew had never seen him so composed, so controlled. His response to the sexist comment hadn't been a tantrum or an emotional outburst, it had been measured, precise, and masterful. In the quiet of the command center, the captain leaned forward, his fingers dancing over the control panel. The mission was still underway, but his mind was far from the data on his screen. It was on the faces of his crew. He had changed something, but he wasn't entirely sure what it was just yet. He wasn't the type to seek admiration, but today's events had undeniably placed him in a new light. He had faced adversity with calm defiance and had won. The crew respected him, but now there was something more. They feared him, not out of malice, but because they knew what he was capable of. His actions had sparked something in them, though they didn't fully understand it. Some of them admired his confidence, while others were still processing the discomfort of seeing someone speak so plainly against an ingrained system. Among the crew, there was one in particular who watched the captain with newfound interest, a young officer who had always admired the captain's skills but had never thought much about his leadership style. Today, however, something had clicked. The young officer had been a silent observer of the crew's culture for a long time. The sexist comments, the casual discrimination, it had always been there, but he had never known how to address it. The captain's actions, however, had shown him that there was a different way to be. He could lead with integrity, without stooping to the level of petty insults and power games. As the young officer walked past the captain's station later that day, he hesitated. His mind was racing, filled with the images of what had happened. He had never thought to question the culture of the crew before, but now he was beginning to. Was it possible to change things? Was it really that simple? "Captain," the officer began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I just wanted to say, that was impressive. What you did today, I mean." It wasn't just a response to the comment. It was about showing the crew who you really are. The captain didn't look up immediately, but he nodded slowly, acknowledging the officer's words without breaking his focus on the screen. "You learn a lot about people when you stop playing by their rules," he said softly. The officer stood in silence for a moment before speaking again. "I've been with this crew for years, and I've seen a lot of things I didn't agree with. But I never thought there was anything I could do about it." The captain finally turned to him, his eyes sharp and calculating. "There's always something you can do. It's not about changing everything at once. It's about standing firm when it matters. You make one change, and others will follow. The young officer nodded, taking the captain's words to heart. It was the first time he had ever heard the captain speak about leadership in such a personal way. He had always seen the captain as a figurehead, someone to follow, but now he was beginning to understand the depth of what true leadership really meant. As the captain turned back to his duties, the young officer stood there, his mind whirling. He had witnessed something extraordinary today, but it wasn't just about what the captain had done, it was about how it made him feel. Empowered. Inspired. For the first time, he saw a way forward. He could be a part of the change, too. The days following the incident were filled with whispers. The crew members, still stunned by what they had seen, began to reevaluate their own behaviors. The old culture, the one that had been allowed to fester for so long, started to crack. People weren't sure if they were ready for this new world, but the captain had opened the door, and they were walking through it, whether they were ready or not. But there was one thing that became clear: the captain wasn't going to back down. His leadership had ignited something in the crew that no one had expected. The old ways were being challenged, and the future of the ship, of the entire crew, was hanging in the balance. And yet, no one knew how far this change would go. The captain had made his stand, but there were still powerful forces in the ship who weren't ready to let go of the old system. The stage was set for an even greater confrontation. But one thing was for certain: the captain had started something that couldn't be stopped. The days that followed were filled with tension. The ship, once a place where everyone knew their role and kept their heads down, now buzzed with an undercurrent of unease. The crew had felt it before, the tension that came with change, but this time, it was different. This wasn't a routine shift in the command structure or a new mission directive. This was something deeper, something that threatened to uproot everything they had come to accept. At first, the reactions were subtle. A few whispered conversations in the corners of the break rooms. A glance exchanged when someone said something that could be construed as sexist or dismissive. No one was sure how to act, but they all knew that things had shifted. No one was exempt. The captain had made it clear that respect, not tradition, was the order of the day. It didn't take long for the whispers to spread. The sexist comments, once dismissed with little more than a chuckle or an eye roll, began to feel out of place. But the real challenge had come for those who had been complicit in the old ways. The officers who had once stood by, watching the banter, no longer felt so comfortable. The shift in power was unmistakable. One of them, a senior officer who had always been a staunch supporter of the old culture, found himself struggling to understand what had happened. He had always believed that leadership was about control, about asserting dominance in every situation. But the captain's actions had shown him something entirely different. The captain hadn't yelled. He hadn't lashed out. He had simply turned the tables, taking the power from the hands of the oppressor and handing it back to the people who deserved it. It was a lesson the officer wasn't ready to learn. But that didn't matter. The message had been delivered, and now he had to contend with it. The captain, meanwhile, was fully aware of the consequences of his actions. He wasn't naive enough to believe that everyone on board would immediately fall in line. Change was slow, and often met with resistance. He could feel the eyes of his crew upon him, the weight of their expectations pressing down on his shoulders. Some were beginning to admire him more than ever, but others were still holding on to the old ways, unsure if they should follow or resist. And then, the unthinkable happened. During a routine mission briefing, the same senior officer who had clashed with the captain weeks ago made another remark. This time, it was more subtle but still unmistakable. He spoke about the importance of keeping things in their place, a phrase that, while innocuous on the surface, carried with it a strong implication that the status quo should remain intact. The captain's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the room went still. Everyone knew this wasn't just about one more comment. This was about something much bigger. The officer, feeling the shift in the atmosphere, tried to pass off his words with a smile, but no one in the room was laughing anymore. The captain didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a spectacle of the moment. Instead, he walked calmly to the front of the room, his every step measured and deliberate. The crew watched him, waiting for what would happen next. "I've heard this line before," the captain said, his voice steady. "You're right. Things should be kept in their place. But tell me, what happens when the place you're in isn't where you belong?" The question hung in the air, and for a long moment, no one answered. The captain's gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of every crew member, before landing on the officer who had spoken. The message was clear: this wasn't a place where outdated beliefs could thrive. This was a place where action spoke louder than words. The officer stood frozen, unsure of how to respond. He could feel the weight of the captain's gaze on him, but this time, there was no arrogance, no superiority. There was only quiet resolve. The officer, for the first time, realized that he was the one out of place, not the captain. The crew, once passive observers, were now fully invested. They could feel the tide of change rolling through the command center. They didn't know where it would end, but they were starting to realize that this wasn't just about the captain anymore. It was about them. It was about their future, their roles in the world, and how they treated each other. The sexist comments, the subtle dismissals, they were no longer going to be tolerated, not because they had to be, but because they didn't belong. In the days that followed, the captain didn't seek to explain himself. He didn't need to. His actions spoke louder than any lecture ever could. His leadership had already shifted the dynamics of the crew. People began to step up, not because they feared punishment, but because they respected the captain's courage to challenge the status quo. One by one, the crew members began to change. The officer who had spoken the inappropriate comment began to watch his own behavior, his eyes opening to the subtle discrimination that had been present all around him. The others, too, began to reflect on their own actions. They realized that they had been complicit in something that didn't align with the values of true leadership. They understood that the captain's approach wasn't just a lesson in handling comments, it was a blueprint for creating a better environment for everyone on board. The ship's atmosphere had begun to shift. The old hierarchy was crumbling, not because of a single confrontation, but because the captain had shown them that leadership was about inclusivity, respect, and courage. And as the crew navigated the challenges ahead, they knew that their captain had already shown them the way. But the real test was yet to come. The captain's influence was growing, but so was the opposition. The crew's newfound sense of unity and respect wasn't going unnoticed by those still entrenched in the old system. The next challenge would be more difficult, more dangerous than any they had faced before. But the captain was ready. He had already shown them the power of standing up for what's right, and now it was time to put that lesson to the ultimate test. The next mission was supposed to be routine, a standard patrol through the outer sectors of their galaxy. The crew had gone through the briefing, and the tension from the past few days seemed to have settled into an uneasy calm. The captain was his usual composed self, issuing orders with clarity, his leadership now even more evident than before. But beneath the surface, there was something brewing, a storm that no one could predict. As they ventured deeper into uncharted space, the crew started to notice a strange shift in their environment. Communication was spotty, the sensors occasionally flickering, and there were reports of unexplained anomalies in their system. At first, they thought it was just routine malfunctions. But as the glitches became more frequent, an uneasy feeling began to grow. The captain, always vigilant, ordered a thorough diagnostic of their systems. Yet, as they delved deeper into the issue, something strange occurred. The disturbances seemed to align with a particular pattern, and a familiar voice on the intercom broke the silence. "Captain, we need to talk," the senior officer, the one who had been at odds with the captain since the incident, spoke over the comms. His voice was tense, and for the first time, there was a hint of fear in it. The captain knew this officer well. He had always been a man who prided himself on maintaining control, someone who rarely showed vulnerability. But the unease in his voice was unmistakable. Something had changed, and it wasn't just the ship's systems. "Go ahead, officer," the captain responded, his voice calm, but his mind alert. "We've been picking up unusual signals. It's hard to explain. They seem intentional, and they're coming from a nearby asteroid field. I think we're being watched." The room grew silent. The crew members exchanged wary glances. Being watched? No one on the ship had expected such a thing. The officer's words sent a chill down their spines. "Are you certain of this?" the captain asked, his voice unwavering. "I'm not sure," the officer responded. "But I don't think it's a coincidence. We've been having system failures ever since we entered this sector. If it's not sabotage, then we're dealing with something more dangerous." The captain stood still for a moment, his mind running through all the possibilities. Sabotage, space anomalies, or something far worse. The unknown was his constant companion, but this felt different. This was personal. Without another word, the captain ordered the crew into action. He didn't waste time. The mission had already shifted from a routine patrol to something much more pressing. They weren't just exploring the unknown anymore, they were being hunted. The crew scrambled to prepare for whatever lay ahead. The young officer who had been most inspired by the captain's actions earlier was now at his side, working with the captain's team to scan the area for any signs of hostile forces. But the captain's thoughts were focused elsewhere. He knew that this mission wasn't just about dealing with the external threats, it was about managing the internal ones as well. As the ship continued its journey, the officer who had clashed with the captain before grew increasingly uneasy. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, not just with the mission, but with the captain's unflinching resolve. What if the captain was wrong? What if the decision to confront the sexist comments was more about power than principle? It was a thought that had been festering in the officer's mind ever since the incident. And now, it felt like an itch he couldn't scratch. His discomfort grew with every passing hour, each moment they spent in this strange, hostile space. Was the captain really the leader he appeared to be? Or was there something more sinister at play? In the midst of these swirling thoughts, the ship jolted suddenly, breaking the officer's concentration. A loud clang echoed throughout the ship as the crew scrambled to their stations. The ship had collided with something invisible. The captain's voice rang through the comms. "Report," he demanded. "It's an asteroid field, sir," came the reply from the tactical officer. "We've sustained minor damage. Shields are holding, but we've lost some power to the engines." The crew was quick to spring into action, but there was no time to waste. The captain's calm demeanor never faltered as he ordered the crew to stabilize the ship and prepare for evasive maneuvers. But deep inside, he knew that this was no accident. The anomalies, the glitches, the strange behavior of the ship, it wasn't just bad luck. They were being targeted. As the crew worked to repair the ship, the captain pulled the officer aside, the same one who had made the sexist comment. The captain's tone was cold, but not unkind. "Officer, I need to know if there's anything you're not telling me. This is no longer a routine mission. Someone is behind this. We need to trust each other more than ever if we're going to survive." The officer hesitated. His eyes flickered, and for a moment, the captain could see the internal struggle playing out in his mind. The officer's pride was still bruised from the confrontation earlier, but the danger they faced now was far greater than his personal grievances. "You're right," the officer finally admitted, lowering his gaze. "I was wrong about you. The things I said, they don't matter anymore." The captain nodded once, not needing any more words. This was about survival, about the crew standing together as one unit. But the officer's words were more than just an apology, they were an acknowledgement that something deeper had changed. The captain's influence, once thought of as a mere shift in leadership style, had now become a force to be reckoned with. But even as the officer spoke, the captain's mind was still sharp, focused on the task at hand. They weren't just fighting external forces anymore, they were battling something within themselves. The sexist culture, the old guard, the outdated systems, they were all collapsing under the weight of what was happening. And no matter what came next, the captain knew one thing for sure: the ship would either fall together or rise together. There was no middle ground anymore. The tension on the ship was palpable. The damage to the ship wasn't catastrophic, but the anomalies in their systems, the unexplained signal from the asteroid field, and the lingering uncertainty all added up to something bigger than a simple malfunction. The crew was on edge, not just because of the mission, but because they knew they were no longer simply on a routine patrol. This was a test. A test of their leadership, their resolve, and most importantly, their unity. The captain's command was clear: they would not back down. They would find out who or what was behind this, no matter the cost. And yet, as the crew worked tirelessly to repair the ship, there was an unsettling feeling that lingered, something more than the technical failures. The captain couldn't shake the sense that they were being drawn into something far deeper than a simple attack. For days, the crew worked in overdrive, with little rest and constant repairs. The asteroid field loomed outside their ship, and the constant flicker of faulty sensors did little to calm their nerves. But through it all, the captain remained steady, his leadership unwavering. Every decision he made was deliberate, and the crew responded in kind, their respect for him growing with each passing hour. Yet, the unease never truly dissipated. As they approached the heart of the asteroid field, the captain could feel the weight of the challenge ahead. The signals had grown stronger, more focused. It was clear they were being targeted, but by whom? And why? The officer who had once opposed the captain had begun to change. No longer the arrogant skeptic, he now found himself relying on the captain's leadership in ways he hadn't thought possible. It was a subtle shift, but an important one. His old doubts had been replaced with something more valuable: trust. The captain knew this was a turning point. The crew was no longer divided. They had been through the fire, and now they were ready to face whatever lay ahead. As they moved deeper into the asteroid field, the captain gathered his senior officers together for a private briefing. The air was thick with tension as the officers filed into the room, their faces drawn from the constant pressure. "Reports from the outer sectors are conflicting," one of the senior officers said. "We've got multiple signals coming in, but they don't match anything we've encountered before." The captain nodded, his expression focused. "We need to understand what we're dealing with. I don't want to take unnecessary risks. Prepare the ship for a full scan of the asteroid field. We need to know what's hiding in there." The officer who had been at odds with the captain stood silently, his hand resting on the console, looking at the captain with a new sense of respect. It wasn't just the situation that had changed, it was his perception of the captain. The leadership that had once seemed like an act of defiance was now understood as a display of wisdom and foresight. The captain wasn't just challenging the crew to change the culture, he was challenging them to rise to the occasion, to face the unknown with strength and unity. As the scan began, the crew monitored the results. The anomalies in the data grew more pronounced, and the captain's suspicion deepened. They weren't just dealing with technical issues or random disturbances. There was something deliberate behind this. "We've got a new reading," another officer said, looking at the screen. "It's coming from inside the asteroid field, not from the ships or any known structures. It's something else." The captain's eyes narrowed. "Is it a trap?" "It could be," the officer replied. "But we can't rule out the possibility that this is something we've never encountered before." The captain stood still for a moment, weighing their options. The danger was real, but so was the opportunity. This was their moment to prove themselves, to show that they were not afraid of the unknown, that they could face whatever came next without hesitation. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," the captain ordered, his voice steady. "We're going in. But we'll go in smart. No rash decisions." The crew quickly moved into action, preparing the ship for the next phase. The captain's orders were clear, and for the first time, there was no questioning. Everyone, from the highest-ranking officers to the youngest recruits, knew exactly what was expected of them. There was no room for doubt. As they navigated through the asteroid field, the tension built to a boiling point. The ship shook with the impact of asteroids, but the captain held his ground. His mind was sharp, his focus unwavering. He wasn't just navigating the asteroid field, he was navigating the complexities of leadership, of trust, and of survival. Then, without warning, a massive explosion rocked the ship. The lights flickered, and the ship's systems went dark for a split second. The crew was thrown off balance, but the captain's voice rang through the comms, calm and commanding. "Status report," he demanded. "We've lost power to the secondary systems," came the reply. "But we're still in one piece." The captain's mind raced. He knew this was no ordinary attack. This was the test he had been waiting for, the moment when the crew would need to prove that they could stand together, no matter what. "Get the systems back online," the captain ordered. "We can't afford to waste time. We're not backing down from this." As the crew scrambled to restore power, the captain's thoughts turned inward. He had always known that leadership wasn't about power or authority, it was about resilience, about knowing when to push forward and when to pull back. And right now, they needed to push forward. The future of the crew, of the ship, and of everything they stood for depended on it. The crew was ready. The officer who had once been the captain's greatest skeptic was now by his side, helping to direct the crew. They worked together, not as divided factions, but as one unit, united by the captain's vision and the trust he had earned. And in that moment, as the systems hummed back to life and the ship regained its strength, the captain realized that this was what true leadership was about. It wasn't about being right all the time, it was about being there when it mattered most. The ship was once again operational, but the feeling of unease didn't subside. The explosion, though minor, had shaken the crew more than they cared to admit. It was a stark reminder that they weren't just facing a technical malfunction, they were up against something far more unpredictable, something that didn't care about their rules or their systems. As the crew worked to stabilize the ship and continue their mission, the captain remained calm, his resolve steady. But deep inside, he knew they were walking into the unknown, and no amount of preparation could guarantee their safety. It wasn't just about fixing the ship anymore. It was about survival. The captain stood at the command center, watching the crew move with a quiet efficiency that only came from trust. They had come a long way since the initial confrontation. They were no longer divided, no longer questioning his leadership. Now, they were a unit, a team ready to face whatever threat lay ahead. The officer who had once been the captain's most vocal critic had changed, too. He worked with a new sense of purpose, his movements precise and focused. He had seen the captain in action, and now he understood the quiet strength that came with true leadership. The captain's decision to face the sexist comments head-on had been a turning point, not just for the crew, but for him personally. The officer no longer felt the need to hide behind old beliefs. He had learned, through experience and observation, that true leadership didn't come from power, it came from respect and action. "Captain, we've regained full power to the secondary systems," the officer reported, his voice steady. "We're ready to proceed." "Good," the captain replied, his voice calm but firm. "Let's move forward, but stay alert. We don't know what we're walking into." The crew's preparations were methodical, their movements a reflection of their newfound unity. They weren't just reacting to orders, they were anticipating what came next. They were ready, not because they had to be, but because they believed in each other and in their captain. As the ship moved deeper into the asteroid field, the signals grew stronger. The crew had already detected the source, an enormous, cloaked vessel hidden within the debris. It wasn't something they had encountered before, but there was no doubt now. They weren't just being watched, they were being targeted by a force with far more knowledge of their operations than they had imagined. "Incoming transmission," the communication officer said, his voice tense. The captain's eyes narrowed. On screen. The message was short, but its impact was immediate. A distorted voice crackled through the comms, harsh and unfamiliar. "You are trespassing in forbidden space. Turn back now, or face the consequences." The captain's grip on the console tightened, but his face remained impassive. He had expected this. Whoever was behind this had been monitoring them, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Who are you?" the captain demanded, his voice cutting through the static. "Why are you targeting us?" There was a brief pause before the voice returned, this time colder, more menacing. "You are not meant to be here. This is your final warning." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the crew in a stunned silence. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the ship's engines. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to do next. The officer who had been so doubtful of the captain before spoke up. "Captain, this is no ordinary threat. Whoever is behind this knows exactly what they're doing. We can't just power through it." The captain turned to him, his eyes sharp. "We won't power through it. But we will face it together. Prepare for evasive maneuvers. We'll approach cautiously." As the captain issued orders, the crew sprang into action, their movements swift and coordinated. There was no room for hesitation now. The enemy was out there, waiting, and they needed to be ready for anything. The asteroid field around them seemed to close in as they navigated the maze of floating rock. The crew remained tense, their hands steady on the controls, their minds focused on the task at hand. Every flicker of the sensors, every shift in the ship's trajectory was a potential threat. The captain knew that any misstep could be their last. Suddenly, a sharp alarm blared, signaling an incoming missile. The crew scrambled to respond, their training kicking in as they initiated evasive maneuvers. The ship swerved violently, narrowly avoiding the blast. The explosion rocked the ship, sending a wave of energy through the hull. The lights flickered, and the ship groaned in protest as the crew worked to stabilize it. "We've taken damage to the aft section," the tactical officer reported, his voice strained. "Shields are down to 50%. The captain didn't hesitate. "Activate backup shields. Keep evasive maneuvers going. We're not stopping now." With the shields up and the crew working frantically to make repairs, the captain stayed focused, his gaze never wavering. The enemy wasn't going to give up, but neither would they. This was their fight, their moment to prove that they could stand against whatever came their way. As the ship navigated through the debris field, the captain's mind raced. The stakes had never been higher. The enemy was more prepared than they had anticipated, and their own vulnerabilities were starting to show. But the captain's leadership remained unwavering. He had shown the crew what it meant to face adversity head-on, and now, they were doing just that. The young officer, once unsure of his place in this new world, now found himself at the captain's side, offering support and suggestions as the battle raged on. The respect between them was mutual, built on a foundation of trust that had been earned through shared trials. "We're not backing down," the captain muttered under his breath, his voice barely audible over the sound of the ship's systems working to maintain stability. "Not today." And as the crew fought to stay alive, they knew that the captain's unshakable confidence was their anchor. They might be outnumbered, they might be outmatched, but together, they would face this threat as one. The battle raged on as the captain and his crew fought against the unknown threat in the asteroid field. The ship jolted with every impact, the screech of metal grinding against debris reverberating through the hull. The crew worked with precision, guided by their captain's steady leadership, but it was clear that the enemy had the upper hand. Each blast from the cloaked vessel pushed their shields to the brink, and the ship's systems were beginning to show signs of strain. "We can't keep this up much longer," the tactical officer shouted over the noise of the explosions. "Shields are down to 30%, and we've sustained significant damage to the engines. If we don't get out of here soon, we're going to lose control." The captain's mind was a whirlwind of calculations, his every decision sharp and deliberate. He knew the odds were stacked against them, but there was no retreating now. They had come this far, and there was no turning back. "Get the engines back online," the captain commanded, his voice calm, though he could feel the tension building. "I want full power to the aft shields. We're going to make a run for it." The crew sprang into action, their movements fluid and efficient. The young officer, once a skeptic, was now leading a team to stabilize the engines, his focus unwavering as he worked alongside the captain's most trusted officers. The crew was unified, their bonds forged in the heat of battle, and they knew that the captain was right, they had to keep moving forward. As the ship lurched again, the captain's gaze never wavered from the display screen in front of him. His hands flew across the controls, issuing commands with the precision of a master strategist. The enemy's missiles were relentless, but the captain had a plan. "Prepare for evasive maneuver Delta 9, he ordered. "We're going to use the asteroid field to our advantage. We're not just going to run, we're going to make them chase us." The crew's faces lit up with understanding. The captain wasn't just thinking of survival, he was thinking of victory. He wasn't going to let them escape, he was going to turn the tide. The ship weaved and darted through the asteroid field, the crew working in perfect synchronization as they followed the captain's lead. The enemy, hidden behind the debris, struggled to keep up. Every time they thought they had the ship in their sights, it vanished behind a cluster of asteroids. The captain had turned the tables. They weren't the ones being hunted anymore. "We've got them on the run," the communications officer reported. "Their missile lock is broken. They're losing track of us." The crew cheered, but the captain didn't allow himself a moment of relief. They had made it this far, but the enemy was still out there, and their situation was far from secure. "Don't get comfortable," the captain warned. "We're not safe yet. Keep moving." But even as they continued to weave through the asteroid field, the captain's mind was racing. The longer they fought, the more he realized that this was no ordinary enemy. The cloaked vessel was unlike anything they had encountered before, advanced technology, flawless precision. This was no random pirate or band of rogues. Whoever was behind this knew exactly how to exploit the crew's weaknesses. It wasn't just a matter of brute force. It was a test, and they were the subjects. "Captain," the young officer said, his voice tense. "We're picking up another transmission. It's the same distorted voice from earlier. They're trying to break through our comms." "Put it through," the captain said, his voice cold. He had no intention of backing down now. The voice crackled to life once again, distorted but still recognizable. "You are wasting your time. You cannot escape. You are trespassing in a domain far beyond your comprehension. Turn back, and perhaps you will survive this encounter. Keep fighting, and you will meet your end." The captain's grip on the console tightened. The threat was clear, but the crew was stronger than ever. They had faced impossible odds before, and they had always found a way through. "We don't back down," the captain replied, his voice unwavering. "We don't stop until we win." The transmission cut off, but the crew's resolve was solidified. They weren't just fighting for survival anymore, they were fighting for something far greater. They were fighting for respect, for the right to stand as equals in the universe, not as pawns in some larger game. "Prepare for the final push," the captain ordered. "I want everything we've got left directed toward their vessel." This ends now. The crew moved swiftly, their hands working in perfect harmony. The young officer, now fully in sync with the captain's leadership, took charge of the final assault. The ship's weapon systems, though damaged, were still functional, and they would use every last ounce of power to turn the tide. As the ship approached the enemy vessel, the captain's mind was calm, his heart steady. He had led them this far, and now it was time to finish it. "Fire," the captain commanded. The ship's weapon systems discharged with a thunderous roar, sending a barrage of missiles and laser blasts toward the cloaked vessel. The enemy, caught off guard by the captain's relentless assault, tried to retaliate, but the captain was ready. The evasive maneuvers were sharp and precise, avoiding the enemy's fire while relentlessly hammering away at their shields. For what seemed like an eternity, the battle continued. But the captain never faltered. He wasn't just fighting the enemy, he was fighting for the crew, for the respect that had been earned through blood, sweat, and tears. And then, with a final, resounding explosion, the enemy ship's cloaking shield flickered and failed. The ship went dark, and the crew watched in stunned silence as the cloaked vessel finally revealed itself. It was a sight that would stay with them forever, a ship of unparalleled size and design, a weapon far beyond anything they had ever imagined. But it wasn't enough. The captain had won. The crew had won. Together. As the captain stood at the helm, watching the wreckage of their enemy drift into space, he knew one thing for certain: this was more than just a victory. This was a testament to the strength of unity, of respect, and of leadership. The crew had changed. They had been tested, and they had risen to the occasion. They had faced the unknown, the impossible, and had come out victorious. But as the captain turned to his crew, he knew that this battle was just the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more tests, but they would face them together. "Let's get back to work," the captain said with a smile, his voice calm yet full of pride. "We've got a new galaxy to explore." The days following their victory over the cloaked enemy felt surreal. The crew, once uncertain and divided, now stood united in their pride and resolve. There was a new sense of camaraderie aboard the ship, a bond forged through adversity and led by a captain who had shown them what true leadership meant. They had faced the unknown, and together, they had emerged victorious. But as the captain stood on the bridge, watching the stars drift by, he knew that the battle they had just fought wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The threat they had encountered was not some isolated incident, it was a message. Someone, somewhere, was watching them, and they would be ready when the time came for the next test. The crew, still reeling from the intensity of the battle, had returned to their daily routines, but the captain could feel the subtle shift in the atmosphere. There was a new respect between them, a deeper understanding of each other's roles, strengths, and weaknesses. They had been through something that couldn't be undone, and now they knew the true cost of standing up for what was right. It wasn't just the battle with the enemy ship that had changed them, it was the realization that they had stood together, as one, against a force much larger than themselves. The old ways of thinking, the subtle sexism, the complacency in the face of injustice, had all been challenged and shattered in the heat of battle. And in its place, something stronger had emerged, a crew that no longer tolerated division, a crew that stood together, ready to face whatever came next. The captain watched as the young officer, once his most vocal critic, now moved through the corridors with a newfound confidence. He had been transformed by the captain's actions, not just as a leader, but as a human being. The officer was no longer just a follower, he was a part of something much bigger than himself. One day, as the captain walked through the ship, he spotted the officer in the hallway, his face a mixture of contemplation and quiet pride. "How are you holding up?" the captain asked, his tone calm but filled with understanding. The officer paused, glancing up at the captain. I'm better, Captain. We're all better. I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I realized something. The mission wasn't just about survival. It was about us, what we're capable of when we stand together." The captain nodded, his gaze steady. "Exactly. It's easy to forget that, especially when things seem normal. But the real strength of this crew is not in our weapons or our ship, it's in how we support each other. How we rise above the challenges we face, no matter how big or small." The officer smiled, his earlier doubts now replaced with a deep respect for the captain. "You've shown us that, Captain. You led us through the fire. And we'll follow you anywhere." The captain's heart swelled with quiet pride. It wasn't about personal glory. It was about the crew, the people he had come to see not as subordinates, but as equals. They had all been tested, and now, they were more than just a team, they were a family. But despite the peace that had settled over the crew, there were still questions unanswered. The cloaked vessel, the strange signals, the messages, it was clear that whoever had sent them wasn't done yet. The captain knew this wouldn't be the last time they'd face an enemy like that. "Captain," the communications officer said as he entered the bridge, interrupting the captain's thoughts. "We've received a transmission. It's from a Federation ship, requesting immediate communication." The captain turned, his expression calm but alert. The Federation? This could be the confirmation they needed about the nature of the threat they had encountered. "Put it through," the captain ordered. The screen flickered to life, and a stern-looking officer appeared. His uniform marked him as high-ranking, and his demeanor was one of urgency. "Captain, we've been monitoring your recent encounter with the cloaked vessel," the officer began, his tone serious. "We've had similar reports from other sectors, and we believe that what you encountered was not an isolated incident. We're sending a fleet to assist you in further investigations." The captain's mind raced. This was the confirmation he had feared. The events they had just survived were part of something much larger. But they weren't alone in this fight. "Understood," the captain replied, his voice firm. "We're ready. But we need to know more. What can you tell us about the enemy we're facing?" The officer hesitated before responding. "We don't have all the information yet, Captain. But what we do know is that this isn't just a military threat. It's a network, a shadow organization that's been operating in the outer sectors for years. They've been testing us, probing our weaknesses. And now, they're ready to strike." The captain's grip tightened on the console. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was a war they hadn't been prepared for. "We'll need to work together, then," the captain said, his voice steady despite the weight of the news. "But we'll do it on our terms. We don't run from a fight. We face it, head on." The officer on the screen nodded, a glimmer of respect in his eyes. "We'll be in touch, Captain. Prepare your crew. This is only the beginning." As the transmission ended, the captain stood still for a moment, letting the gravity of the situation sink in. The enemy they faced was no longer a mystery, but that didn't make it any less dangerous. The crew had been through hell, but they were still standing. And now, they would face whatever came next, as a team. He turned to his crew, his eyes sweeping across their faces, each one filled with determination. "This is our fight. And we will win it. Together." The ship was quiet now, the calm before the storm. The crew had gathered in the mess hall, where a heavy silence lingered in the air. The reality of what they were facing had set in. They had won battles before, survived impossible odds, but this? This was different. It wasn't just a test of their strength, it was a test of their very purpose. The captain stood at the front of the room, his hands clasped behind his back as he surveyed the faces of his crew. They had been through so much together, but now, there was an unspoken weight between them. This was no longer about tactics or strategies. This was about survival. And in many ways, it was about proving that they were more than just soldiers or officers, they were a family, bound by something stronger than the need to fight. "We're about to face a war," the captain began, his voice calm but carrying the weight of every word. But we are not alone. We have each other. And that's all we need. The room remained silent, but the captain could feel the strength of his words sink into the hearts of those who listened. The young officer, now standing with his back straight and shoulders squared, looked at the captain with pride. He had seen it before, the way the captain could inspire, could lift people from the lowest point and make them believe they could accomplish anything. Whatever happens, we face it as one, the captain continued. We fight not because we are soldiers, but because we are human. We are not invincible, but we have something far more powerful than invincibility, each other. The crew, once uncertain and divided, now stood united in purpose. They had gone through hell and back, and they knew what they were capable of. They were no longer the same people who had boarded the ship for a simple mission. They were a force, tested by fire, tempered by adversity, and bound together by a bond that nothing could break. The captain paused, his gaze sweeping over the crew, taking in every face. He knew they were ready. Not just for the battle that awaited them, but for the future that lay beyond it. They had learned something far more important than survival on this journey. They had learned to trust, to lead with integrity, and to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. This is our time, the captain said, his voice steady and resolute. We may not know what the future holds, but I do know this, we will face it together, as a family. And that's something no enemy can defeat. The crew stood in silent acknowledgement. There were no cheers, no applause, just a quiet, unspoken understanding that their captain had given them something far more valuable than a plan. He had given them hope. Outside the ship, the stars stretched out before them, endless and vast. The crew knew the journey ahead would be treacherous. But it didn't matter. They had faced impossible odds before, and together, they had risen above them. They knew what they were fighting for, and that was more powerful than any weapon or enemy they would ever face. As the captain turned to leave the mess hall, he felt a sense of peace wash over him. He wasn't just leading a crew. He was leading a family that had been tested, had been pushed to the brink, and had come out stronger for it. And no matter what came next, he knew they would face it together. The mission was far from over. The enemy, whoever they were, would return. But the captain was ready. The crew was ready. And as long as they stood together, there was nothing they couldn't face. Let's get to work, the captain said, his voice filled with quiet determination. Our fight isn't over yet. And with that, the ship moved forward, into the unknown, into the future they would shape together. The journey ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear, no matter what came next, they had learned a vital truth, that unity, respect, and the strength of their shared purpose would always guide them through the darkest of times.